I'm honored, and I'm even more honored, because what we're talking about here is so important. And all along, when many people thought maybe Blake Lively simply wanted the rights, or even that she might end up directing the project herself, the deeper truth that has begun to emerge is that Colleen Hoover perhaps never wanted to give up control of her second novel's destiny. And that brings us back to the center of this firestorm. Welcome back to Starscope, where the drama burns hotter than any summer blockbuster. Because right now, Colleen Hoover, the queen of contemporary romance, is caught in absolute turmoil. And the sting comes not from outsiders, but from people she trusted the most, with none other than Blake Lively at the center of it all. The betrayal narrative is jaw-dropping. Justin Baldoni wasn't just another Hollywood name floating around. He was handpicked to direct It Ends With Us, the film adaptation of Hoover's best-selling novel A Story Readers Hold, almost like sacred scripture. And for years, fans dreamed of finally seeing it come to life on screen. Yet instead of a celebration, the project has spiraled into chaos. Insiders say Baldoni was blindsided. He entered believing the story was in steady hands. But what emerged was a battlefield of clashing visions. The early warning signs were visible from the start. Leaked set photos triggered outrage, casting choices. Costumes, even the aesthetic, felt so far removed from the book's emotional heart. Readers immediately questioned why Lily Bloom, a character written in her 20s, suddenly looked decades older, and why the whole vibe felt disconnected from the novel's raw themes. Rumors quickly spread that Blake was not protecting the story at all, but instead pushing for drastic changes that stripped the novel of its authenticity. Baldoni resisted, determined to stay true. Yet instead of collaboration, he allegedly found himself cut out. Reports revealed promises of partnership were hollow because by the time he realized he had little say in critical decisions, the momentum had already been taken from him. Fans saw the cracks and they erupted. Social media exploded with anger, dragging the production and accusing it of being an entirely different story disguised in the skin of Hoover's novel. Baldoni supporters rallied, refusing to let him be erased, while Hoover and Blake remained eerily silent. No clarifications, no press statements, only calculated quiet, while the internet-burned PR veterans noted that silence often signals strategy, waited out until the flames die down. But behind the scenes, whispers grew darker, suggesting Hoover herself had plotted for months to edge Baldoni out, working with Blake to build a case and executing a slick takedown that secured her control of the project, no matter the collateral damage, critics pointed out. Hoover's history of dodging accountability, from tone-deaf marketing moves like her infamous coloring book, to ignoring scandals surrounding her family, and to many this latest betrayal, fit an established pattern: deflect, redirect, consolidate power. But where does this leave the movie officially? It's still happening. But will fans show up? That is the burning question. Hoover's readers are not casual moviegoers. They are fiercely loyal. If they believe the adaptation betrays the story they cherish, they will boycott, and in today's climate, organized rejection can sink a film entirely. What was supposed to be a dream collaboration between a best-selling author, a passionate director, and a beloved story has now become a cautionary tale about trust control and Hollywood power games. Because when you rewind to 2019, before TikTok made the novel explode, Justin Baldoni was the one who spotted its potential, reached out, personally gushing about its emotional power and begging to help bring it to the screen. Hoover was thrilled. Their early exchanges showed genuine excitement and partnership. Yet today, that partnership lies in ashes, and whether Hoover orchestrated this betrayal, whether Blake steamrolled Baldoni, or whether the truth sits murkily in the middle, one fact is undeniable: the fans have seen behind the curtain. The machinery of manipulation has been revealed, and once that happens, you can never unsee it. And so the question now is simple: was Colleen Hoover a mastermind pulling strings? Was she a puppet caught in Blake Lively's carefully spun web? Or was she both the co-conspirator and the casualty in a story that has gone from dream project to Hollywood nightmare? Either way, the fallout is devastating, and the lies, the manipulations, and the betrayals are catching up fast. And as the storm continued to spiral further into chaos, the silence from Blake Lively and Colleen Hoover only poured more gasoline on the fire, because the louder the fans screamed, the more devastating the optics became. Insiders started leaking. Whispers from behind the closed doors of the production claiming that Justin Baldoni was left blindsided by the moves happening around him. One day he believed he was a partner with real power to protect the integrity of the story, and the next, he realized decisions were being pushed forward without his consent. The The heart of the novel, It Ends With Us, was ripped apart in front of the very eyes of the author's most loyal followers, and instead of transparency, the silence screamed volumes. Because silence in Hollywood rarely means confusion, it usually means strategy, and the strategy here looked cold, calculated, and ruthless. Fans dug deeper, unearthing old interviews where Hoover praised Baldoni, calling him the perfect choice to helm the adaptation. And yet in the present moment, those words felt like daggers of betrayal. Because how could an author who publicly celebrated a collaborator so intensely suddenly turn so icy and stand silent while the internet tore him apart? It painted the portrait of someone playing a long game, a power grab masked under sweet words, and that revelation made the betrayal feel personal to readers who had given Hoover everything: their loyalty, their dollars, their trust in her words, and in her values. And now the mask was slipping. Blake Lively became the lightning rod because her involvement seemed to coincide with the collapse of everything fans had dreamed of about this film, from the casting to the wardrobe to the energy of the set. Nothing felt like the novel, and the optics twisted further when fans realized Blake wasn't just acting. She was allegedly pulling strings on decisions far bigger than her role as Lily Bloom, decisions that should have belonged to the director, but now felt hijacked by an actress with star power. Hoover stayed silent again, leaving the audience to interpret silence as consent to whatever Blake wanted. And Baldoni's supporters went to war online, their rage multiplying by the hour. Hashtags demanding justice for Justin exploded. And within days, fan accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers were fueling boycotts long before the film even wrapped production. But what made this betrayal even darker were the reports that Hoover had never truly wanted to relinquish control of her second novel in the first place, and that everything from the contracts to the quiet maneuvering behind closed doors had been laying the foundation for her to step in at the perfect moment to shove Baldoni aside as though he were nothing but a pawn. And the more this theory gained traction, the more fans lost faith. Because this wasn't just about a movie anymore. It was about the character of the woman who wrote a story millions cherished. How could she betray the very essence of what her novel stood for: a story about love, survival, and strength, now smeared with whispers of greed, ego, and manipulation? And the emotional storm would not calm, because every day new whispers leaked out, set insiders describing tension-heated conversations, closed-door meetings where voices were raised, and Justin left looking defeated as decisions passed him by every move, painting the picture of an artist stripped of the very creative control he had once been promised. And fans watched horrified, unable to look away, because this was no longer fiction. It was a drama playing out in real time, on their timelines, on their feeds, across Starscope and beyond, with every update fueling the sense that something deeply rotten was poisoning the project. And if Hoover was truly orchestrating this betrayal, if Blake was complicit, then the legacy of this adaptation would forever be cursed, and the audience would never forgive them, because once trust is broken, it can never be restored. And that was the ultimate tragedy playing out before our eyes. And as the noise grew louder, the internet began pulling receipts. Screenshots resurfaced, old interviews, and contradictory statements from Blake Lively and Colleen Hoover became fuel for the growing outrage. One moment, Blake was seen praising the loyalty of the fans, promising she understood the depth of the novel and that she would respect its essence, and the next moment she was accused of hijacking creative choices that betrayed everything the fans loved about Lily Bloom. And what shook the audience most was not just the decisions themselves, but the arrogance in the silence. Because when you watch millions of readers scream about the destruction of their favorite story, and you say nothing, it feels like contempt. And that contempt burned like fire across the internet. Hoover, who had once branded herself as a voice for women, for survivors, for those who needed hope, now stood in the shadows watching her empire shake as fans begged for answers, begged for transparency, begged for just one sign that she still cared about the very people who made her the phenomenon she became. But day after day, the silence persisted, and with each hour, the whispers grew darker, because the theories of betrayal became harder to deny. If Hoover had fought for Justin Baldoni at the start, if she had truly believed in his vision, then how could she allow him to be stripped of creative power so blatantly, unless she had been part of the scheme all along? And then came the allegations that contracts were drawn to favor her control, that Blake's influence was not coincidental, but deliberately positioned to replace Baldoni's authority. And suddenly, this wasn't a story about artistic differences anymore. It was about power. Politics, manipulation, and deception. It was about the crushing realization that the people fans once saw as heroes could in reality be villains cloaked in charm and smiles. And the internet latched onto this narrative with ferocity because betrayal is always more dramatic than conflict. And this betrayal cut deeper than most, since it touched a story millions held sacred. When behind-the-scenes reports suggested that wardrobe fights, script rewrites, and even casting controversies all stemmed from Blake's interference, fans began piecing together the puzzle into one undeniable picture. Blake was not just an actress, she was an architect of chaos, and Hoover, by refusing to defend Baldoni, seemed complicit in every single choice, and the heartbreak from fans turned to fury. They trended hashtags demanding Hoover's books be boycotted. They turned Lively from a beloved actress into a symbol of betrayal, and Starscope reports amplified the chaos, showing how every time the court of public opinion turned darker, the silence from Hoover's camp became more deafening, and fans felt like they were watching a mask slowly peel away to reveal the cold truth beneath the truth, that greed and ego had poisoned everything. And it was in this growing storm that Baldoni himself became almost mythic. A tragic figure stripped of power by forces larger than him. A man once hailed as the steward of the novel, now painted as its victim. Whispers spread that Baldoni had considered walking away altogether, that the betrayal was so crushing, he questioned if he could salvage anything from the wreckage, and fans clung to him with desperation, begging him to stay, begging him not to abandon them because they believed he was the only one who could keep the story pure. Yet the darkness around him grew as though every move he made was undermined. Every decision overturned, every piece of authority ripped from his hands. The deeper fans dug, the more sinister it felt, because this wasn't incompetence. This felt intentional, a coordinated effort to erase him from his own project. And with every leak, every whisper, every contradiction, the internet screamed louder that Blake and Hoover had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed because the damage was already done, the trust was shattered, and the betrayal immortalized. And still there was silence. Silence that screamed louder than words ever could silence, that confirmed to fans everything they feared. That the betrayal was real, that the lies were calculated, and that the truth once hidden in shadows was now exposed under the blinding spotlight of outrage. And as the chaos reached new levels, the fractures within the fandom began to spread like wildfire, because people who had once celebrated the magic of the novel together now found themselves divided into camps, some desperate to defend Blake, Lively insisting she was misunderstood, a victim of exaggerated headlines, a woman caught in the middle of a storm she did not create, and yet for every voice that defended her, there were hundreds more tearing into her choices, accusing her of arrogance, vanity, and a hunger for control that knew no bounds, while others turned their anger toward Colleen Hoover, saying she had betrayed them more deeply than anyone because she was the author, the creator, the one person who had sworn to honor their trust. And yet she stood silent while everything fell apart, and the silence felt like complicity. It felt like watching a fire consume everything you love, while the one person who could stop it simply walked away. And in that silence grew rumors that Hoover had always planned this, that the adaptation was never about honoring the fans, but about reshaping her empire in Hollywood, using Blake as the face and Justin Baldoni as the scapegoat. And those rumors became fuel for endless conspiracy threads, breaking down every cryptic post, every deleted comment, every slip of the tongue in interviews. Because fans were desperate for answers, desperate for someone to admit the truth. But the truth never came, and in the absence of truth, the lies became reality, and with reality came fury. The fury of millions who felt robbed of their voice, the fury of survivors who felt their pain was being used as a bargaining chip for fame. The fury of readers who believed they had been played like pawns in a corporate chess game. And this fury manifested in waves of boycotts, petitions, threats of abandoning, not just the film, but every piece of work Hoover would ever publish again. And the fury did not stop at Hoover or Blake. It grew larger, spreading to the production companies, to the publishers, to anyone associated with this mess. Because betrayal never stays contained. Betrayal spreads like poison, infecting everything it touches, and the internet fed on that poison, turning every headline into an indictment, every silence into an admission, and every denial into proof of guilt. And the louder the outrage grew, the more it became clear that this was no longer just a story about a film adaptation. This had transformed into a cultural reckoning, A moment where fans realized they had power, and that power could destroy empires. And in the middle of that reckoning, Baldoni became the symbol of resistance. A man wronged. A man silenced, a man stripped of his rightful place, yet somehow still standing still fighting, and fans rallied behind him with a loyalty that bordered on desperation, because they needed someone to believe in, someone to hold on to in the chaos. And Baldoni became that figure not because he asked for it, but because the betrayal around him forced it upon him. And every whisper that he was considering walking away only amplified the fear, because fans knew if Baldoni left, the last shred of hope would vanish forever. And still Blake and Hoover offered nothing. No explanation, no apology, no transparency. Only silence. And that silence became unbearable. It became louder than words, louder than screams, louder than the outrage itself, because silence in the face of betrayal is confirmation. It is surrender, it is proof, and fans knew it. They felt it in their bones that the truth was darker than they ever imagined. That what they were seeing was only the surface, and beneath it lay something far more sinister. Something that would haunt this adaptation forever. Because even if the film released, even if it found an audience, even if the industry spun it into a success, the scars would remain. The betrayal would remain, the shattered trust would remain, and fans would never forget the lies they felt and the voices they lost in the storm. And as the storm reached its most violent peak, the entire narrative began to fracture into something almost unrecognizable, because what started as a simple adaptation spiraled into an all-out war that consumed every corner of the conversation. And with each passing day, the shadows around Blake Lively and Colleen Hoover grew darker, more suffocating, more impossible to escape. Fans demanded accountability. They demanded to know why their trust had been treated like disposable currency. Why their pain had been used as entertainment. Why their voices were silenced, while the same Hollywood machine that claimed to care about representation profited off their silence. And in that demand for accountability came revelations that cut deeper than any rumor, because whispers began to spread about secret meetings between executives and publicists, about carefully crafted PR strategies designed not to protect the fans, but to shield Blake from the avalanche of backlash. And the moment those whispers hit the surface, the audience knew they had been right all along. They knew this was never about respect or honesty. This was always about control and the need to protect an image. Even if it meant burning the story, the community, and the truth to the ground. And that realization unleashed a rage that no one could control. Petitions turned into organized boycotts. Boycotts turned into coordinated campaigns. Campaigns turned into mass takedowns of anything associated with Blake and Hoover, and soon every project, every deal, every brand that even dared to stand near them was flooded with anger, until corporate partners began to pull back, unwilling to face the firestorm. And yet still, Blake refused to bend. She refused to admit fault. She refused to acknowledge the depth of betrayal, choosing instead to hide behind silence and calculated smiles, while Hoover faded into the shadows, pretending nothing had happened. And every refusal, every dodge, every empty gesture only poured gasoline on the flames, because betrayal festers, it multiplies. It grows into something monstrous. And now it had grown so large that even the industry itself was starting to fracture, as insiders began to speak out, some anonymously, some publicly, confirming that Baldoni had been sidelined, confirming that choices had been manipulated, confirming that this adaptation was never meant to honor the truth, but to reshape it into something profitable, controllable, and soulless. And when those confirmations began to spread, it no longer felt like speculation, it felt like a verdict. And that verdict was damning, because fans knew now, without a doubt, that they had been right from the beginning. Their instincts, their outrage, their heartbreak had not been overreactions. They had been warnings, and those warnings were ignored, dismissed, silenced, until the truth came roaring back and exposed everything. And as that truth tore through the headlines, it was clear that this story would not end with a film premiere or a PR apology. This story had become bigger than that. It had become a symbol of how betrayal festers when left unchecked, of how silence can be louder than lies, of how greed and ego can take something pure and twist it into something hollow and lifeless. And in that symbol, Baldoni once again stood at the center. A reluctant martyr, a man forced into exile by decisions he did not make, yet forever tied to the pain that followed, and fans clung to him with every ounce of faith they had left because he represented what could have been, what should have been, what was stolen from them, and in that clinging hope became defiance. Defiance became obsession, became power, and that power turned the fandom into a force. No one could control a force that would chase this scandal through every corner of Hollywood, through every interview, every article, every red carpet moment, refusing to let Blake Lively escape the weight of what she had done, refusing to let Colleen Hoover bury the silence, refusing to let the industry spin this betrayal into just another headline. Because for the fans, this was not just about a film. This was about their story, their truth, their voice. And they would not let it be taken from them again, no matter what it cost. And now, as the dust finally begins to settle, we are left staring at the wreckage of a story that should have been a celebration, but instead became a battlefield of betrayal, silence, manipulation, and heartbreak. Because what began as hope for representation and healing turned into a ruthless game of control, where the truth was twisted and fans were treated as pawns. And yet, even in the ruins, one truth remains unshaken. The voices of the betrayed cannot be erased. They echo louder than any publicist. They burn brighter than any carefully crafted lie, and they refuse to be silenced because this scandal has already carved itself into history. And no matter how hard Blake Lively or Colleen Hoover or anyone in the machine tries to rewrite it, the scars will remain forever, reminding everyone of the cost of deception and the strength of those who dare to call it out. And as we stand here looking at the pieces, one thing becomes painfully clear. This is not the end, it is only the beginning. Because every unanswered question, every broken promise, every calculated move will circle back again and again until justice is felt and truth is undeniable. And while those at the center may try to move on pretending, nothing happened. The world is watching. The fans are watching. The truth is watching. And sooner or later, the weight of what they tried to bury will consume them completely. Because scandals like this do not fade, they ignite movements. They awaken. Voices, they leave marks that cannot be hidden. And in those marks lies the real ending, a lingering, haunting reminder that once trust is destroyed, nothing will ever be the same again.